Hi everybody, my name is Sabina Dhinsda and I'm a sophomore majoring in political science and NRES, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Supreme Court and term limits. So let's get started. So after the 2022 landmark decision that was made by the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade, we saw a plummet in the public's trust in the Supreme Court. It actually went to an all-time low for the 21st century. As you can see in these two graphs, that is by party and just by public, we've seen an all-time low in trust. And although it's slowly been inching up, politicians are asking the important question of what can we do to increase the public's support for the Supreme Court? And so what do politicians propose we do to fix this? Let's hear from Joe Biden on what he thinks would be a good solution.
Term limits would help ensure that the court membership changes with some regularity. That would make timing for the court's nomination more predictable and less arbitrary. Reduce the chance that any single presidency imposes.
So, as we just heard from President Biden, he believes that term limits would be a good solution to this issue of public trust that would create more turnover in the court. But before we look at what term limits would look like in the court, let's understand, what does a court look like right now? Right now, justices serve with lifetime tenure, and essentially this means that from the second they're put on the seat in that court, they can serve for as long or as little as they choose to be themselves. So most of the time we see justices either go into their late years in their life, pass away serving on that seat, or choosing to retire at a very old age. And there's a multitude of reasons actually why the founders chose to have lifetime tenure, mainly though two being for creating independence in the Supreme Court. The founders feared that if the court was tied, the turnover was tied specifically to the executive branch very systematically, the founders feared that it would create a more politicized court. The founders also wanted to not have turnover instability. They feared that if turnover was really constant, then the court's interpretation of the Constitution wouldn't be, and they wanted the Supreme Court to be something that kind of had one interpretation of the Constitution that was staying constant. And so let's hear what a Yale political science professor thinks about the Supreme Court right now.
End of the life cycle, the status quo allows for full service of justices who are too old, whose arteries have literally hardened, and who are not at their prime. Historically, most justices have not done their best work in their superannuated years. There are, of course, exceptions, my friends, of course.
As we heard from that professor, we've seen justices serve into very late years in their life. And a lot of the public and politicians have found issue with this. People serving when they may not be as mentally sharp as they were 20, 30 years ago can bring into questions the decisions that they are making. And so the solution to this issue that people believe would work is a term limit. And as President Biden and that professor endorsed, they both believe that an 18-year term limit would be a good solution to these issues that are brought up. But what would an 18-year term limit look like? It would essentially mean that there's a legal restriction on the amount of time that justices can sit on that court, and it would be 18 years. And that every president who serves one term would get 2 nominations. This essentially means that a 2-term president would get 4. And so let's actually break down, what would this look like in practice? What would this look like in practice? Yeah, okay, so let's break down the potential benefits and potential harms. So some potential benefits that could come from having term limits on the Supreme Court is a mitigation for Senate gamemanship and the blocking of nominees. As we saw in 2016 with the nomination of Merrick Garland, the Republican-controlled Senate blocked that nominee and eventually held that seat for the next president, Donald Trump. And so 18-year term limits hope to mitigate the gamemanship that we've seen increase in recent years with the Supreme Court seats opening up. 18-year term limits also hope to attempt to stop court stacking and just the uneven amount of numbers that presidents get to nominate justices to the court with. And it also hopes to regulate turnover. 18-year term limits hope that through the regulation of turnover, it would hopefully depoliticize the court. But with everything that's good, there's also some bad. There are some potential harms that could also come from 18-year term limits. The first one being court packing due to unexpected vacancies. If a justice passes away or falls ill and has to step down, this means that a 2-term president under an 18-year term limited plan would get to appoint the majority of justices on that court. And that is a very big issue that could happen from this, so it's just something to keep in mind. Another potential harm is the politicization of because of jobs post-tenure. As we've seen, justices are being nominated at younger and younger ages. And so the question rises, after 18 years, will they want to work another job? And if so, will they owe something to that party that put them there to get a job after? And the last potential harm is just instability in the court due to constant turnover. As the founders feared, constant turnover can kind of create a not so solidified interpretation of the Constitution, and this could create some instability in the court's decisions. So let's circle back to the question that we asked at the beginning: would term limits be a solution to the issue of public trust? A University of Pennsylvania poll took on trust and how people would feel about term limits. As you can see from every party, most people somewhat favor term limits. And so this kind of sheds light to what people believe that they want to see from the court, and sheds some light on what people probably would like to see from the court and what would increase their trust. These are my works cited, and thank you. Do you guys have any questions?